Hello you guys, welcome back to my channel. I am so excited for today's video because we get to talk about eyeshadow palettes, and not only eyeshadow palettes, but we get to talk about my top 3 eyeshadow palettes in 9 different categories that I have laid out for you. I originally saw this video done by Ensley many years ago, and I like to update this every single year as I test and try new eyeshadow palettes, and new eyeshadow palettes eventually replace potential old favorites. So I will leave my previous years linked down below in case you're interested in checking those out. I did not go back and watch the previous years to see what is still a favorite and what potentially isn't, but I have changed the categories just slightly. We've tweaked the categories a little bit. So the 9 categories that we'll be talking about today are neutral palettes with a twist, small eyeshadow palettes, affordable, and by affordable I don't actually mean affordable in this day and age. I have affordable set at 50 and under, which I get is not affordable. But then I have a luxury category, which is anything that is over $50. I have indie, I have mainstream, I forgot I have colorful, and then I also have the top 3 palettes that I have tried this year, which, spoiler, I did recently post a ranking of all of the palettes that I've tried so far this year, so you might see some spoilers if you have not yet watched the ranking video. The one other note that I will make is that I didn't want any palettes repeated. So there are, like, for example, my top 3 palettes are not exactly my top 3 because then I have a top 3 indie. I just wanted to talk about as many eyeshadow palettes as possible. So just know that going in. But if you're interested in seeing and hearing about my top 3 eyeshadow palettes in every category, stay tuned. Oh, I also recently posted my top 3 makeup products in every category, so I will leave that link down below so you can check that out. But other than that, let's jump into, I don't know if I said, if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. Other than that, let's jump into the video. Yesterday I chopped my hair. It's still long, but I cut it myself and I'm not exactly sure how I'm feeling, but it's fine. Too lazy to actually go get my hair cut. Okay, let's start with my top 3 neutral palettes. I know some of these have remained favorites. So up first I have the Natasha Denona Biba eyeshadow palette. This has been in my collection for quite some time now, and if I'm wanting something that is just a reliable basic B sort of palette, mostly warm tones, but we do have a row of cool tones in here, this is such a staple. I understand this is a very expensive eyeshadow palette. However, if you're looking to make an investment into an eyeshadow palette that is just going to be like a perfect everyday reach for, again, mostly warm leaning neutral looks, I think this is such an incredible palette for that, and one that has remained a favorite over the years. All right, probably even more so than that, I have my Natasha Denona Gold eyeshadow palette, which I know you can no longer get, but Alter Ego, an indie brand, dupe brand, does make a dupe to this eyeshadow palette. That palette is the Goddess eyeshadow palette, and I will say all of the Alter Ego palettes that I've tried, I've been very impressed with the quality. So if you're looking for this color story, definitely check out Alter Ego. I just adore this eyeshadow palette. I love the different undertones amongst the browns, and truly, if I could only use this eyeshadow palette, like if I could only use the browns in this eyeshadow palette and couldn't use any other browns in my entire collection, I would make it work because I just love these matte browns. And then on top of that, we have some really beautiful golds, greens, and even a couple pops of blue, which I just think makes this palette a little bit fun and a little bit interesting. So this would be my number 2. And by the way, I'm not ranking these like 1, 2, and 3, like it's just the top 3. And the third eyeshadow palette, I didn't realize all of these are Natasha Denona. Clearly I love Natasha Denona for their neutrals. This one is new to my collection this year, but already I have been so in love with the I Need a Warm eyeshadow palette. I thought that I definitely preferred cool tones, but I have found that I actually really love a warm brown eyeshadow look. I think even more than I love a cool brown eyeshadow look. So this palette kind of gives me the best of both worlds because we do have these neutrals on this end. So if I'm wanting something a little more neutral leaning or a little bit more cool leaning, I do still have that option in this palette. And then we have some really beautiful browns as well. Amongst the shimmer shades in this palette, I do feel like there's a good variety. It's not just like the same old neutrals. Like I do feel like there's some variety amongst the neutrals in this palette, and I am just such a fan of this one. Then we have our neutral palettes with a twist. So these are like neutrals, but there's something about it that makes it maybe like a little non-neutral, or there's just a little bit of a twist to it. I do actually have a video on my channel. I think it's top 12 neutral palettes with a twist. But there's one of these eyeshadow palettes for sure that had not yet released that I'll be talking about. But why don't we kick it off with the Glaminatrix Nearly Natural eyeshadow palette. You guys, it is happening. It is happening. They are bringing this eyeshadow back. They're bringing this eyeshadow palette back, and I think that is the most brilliant move on Glaminatrix end, because there are so many people that want this palette, that have been asking for this palette, and that I feel like their collection could benefit from having this palette. This palette has quickly become, since owning it, one of, if not my top favorite eyeshadow palette in my entire collection. I'll be interested to know when they bring it back, are they tweaking any of the formula, like, or is it going to just be this? I hope that they don't tweak the formula, because I love everything about this eyeshadow palette. The mattes in this palette are not going to be so pigmented off the bat that like it's just this like super intense boldness on your eyes, and I actually really appreciate that, mostly because I can be a little bit heavy-handed with my makeup. So the buildable the better, in my opinion, when it comes to matte shadows. But when it comes to their shimmer and metallic shades in this palette, they're so punchy and so metallic right off the jump, and I just love this palette. We have some neutral browns, we have some dusty mauves, we have some greens. There's such a variety of shadows in this palette. Like, I really feel like you can take this so many directions. I have loved every single look that I've created with this palette. This palette always comes traveling with me. I'm telling you, don't miss out on this one when they bring it back. I don't know if they're bringing it back permanently, if it's gonna be like limited edition. Do not miss this one. It is so good. And then we can talk about this one next, because it's another Glaminatrix eyeshadow palette. This one is a recent launch. This is the Barely Basic eyeshadow palette. I feel like that's a very fitting term for this palette, because it is basic but barely because honestly, like, you only have one row of like browns, or almost like that clay color. Then you have greens, mauves, and a row of like cool tone taupey grays. Glaminatrix makes such a beautiful special shade, just really shifty, but not like super multi-chrome, in the fact that like sometimes multi-chromes just look a little odd on your eyes. These are more just like shifty duochromes, and I think that they're stunning. So I mean, this would be my recommendation. Like, if you can't get, I put it on the ground, if you can't get the Nearly Natural, I do like the Nearly Natural more than this. I will say these shades, there's definitely more shiftiness amongst the like special shades in this palette, whereas the Nearly Natural is more just like really punchy metallics. So kind of based on that knowledge, like, go in the direction that you feel would work best for you, your preferences and your collection. For me, I like the Nearly Natural a little bit better, but I also think this is a really beautiful palette, especially for the fall time. Like, I feel like there's some grunginess to this eyeshadow palette, and it's just a beautiful one. And then the third palette that is a top neutral with a twist is the Adept Flying Fiddles eyeshadow palette. This is, again, just such a fun color story. With this one, you're not necessarily getting, aside from the shade Sahara, you're not really getting a lot of like browns in terms of like neutrals in that way, but we do have some like dusty purples, which I do think like a mauve eyeshadow look can be considered neutral in a way. But this one definitely has the most like twists of the three that I'm sharing with you. I absolutely love the shade Scorpion Grass. It's this really beautiful kind of teal, blue-green, aqua sort of shifty shade. I think it's absolutely stunning, and this paired with like browns makes for such a beautiful office appropriate look, in my opinion. It's something I feel comfortable wearing to work. I know that's going to differ from, you know, person to person, profession to profession, but I have found that I can create looks with this that I feel comfortable wearing to work. There's a really beautiful kind of champagne shade in here, and I just think this is a really fun one that you can really go neutral with, or you definitely can really go more green or more colorful. So this would be my third favorite in terms of neutral palettes with a twist. Let's move on to the colorful category. I do like to play around with color, but I definitely don't do like rainbow looks every single day. So all three colorful palettes that I'm going to share with you are new to my collection this year. We can start with the Blend Bunny Surge eyeshadow palette. I talk a lot about how I love a bright, fun neon, not necessarily like in my makeup, although I do love a neon inner corner. We know this, a neon inner corner with like a wing love that look. But I just love, like, a bright neon just makes my soul happy. So I love that we have a full row of neons. And while the rest of the palette might not be the most colorful thing you've ever seen, I really have done some really colorful looks with this eyeshadow palette. I have had so much fun with this eyeshadow palette. This eyeshadow palette has definitely made me kind of think outside of my normal comfort zone. So I think this is a beautiful one. And I feel like the Blend Bunny formula, specifically their mattes, is just so impressive. I feel like they actually just like blend themselves. Been so impressed with this matte formula. So this would be my first one. Why do I feel like I'm out of breath? Is it just like the way I speak? Like I do a run-on sentence before I take a breath of air. All right, next up. This one is very bright. This is the Ensley Rain Flourish eyeshadow palette. You guys know, if you have watched any video of me talking about eyeshadow palettes this year, I am such a fan of the Ensley Rain formula, as so many others are. I just think that their shimmer shades are so special and just something else on the eyes. Like, I just don't even have words. This one is so fun. Again, kind of bright pops of almost neon shades. And I feel like you might look into this eyeshadow palette and think like nothing really like goes together, like what am I to do? But really with this palette, I feel like you can take one of the colorful matte shades, use this shade to deepen it up, and then just choose one of the sparkly shades, and you're gonna have such a fun look. I love the selection of shimmers in this eyeshadow palette. And even the shade Dahlia Magic, which might not be my typical everyday reach, I think that shade is so stunning. I'm literally drooling over the shade Buttercup. Can you tell how excited I am about this palette? Buttercup Bliss, for a yellow, like literally I feel like I say this sometimes, I could lick the shade. Like, the thoughts happening in my mind about eyeshadow as I'm speaking about Ensley Rain's shimmer formula, like, it's like what is happening up in my brain. But Buttercup Bliss Sunbeam, oh my gosh, for like a chunkier metallic like orangey shade, it is so beautiful. And then Fairy Flutter, which is this kind of like bronzy shifty shade. Oh, it's so beautiful. I feel like this is a really approachable, colorful eyeshadow palette, at least for me, in the way that I like to do my makeup looks, because you can do a basic, very colorful look with just 3 shades very easily. And the third colorful palette that I wanted to talk about is the Danessa Myricks Lightwork Volume 6. I have a whole dedicated review on this eyeshadow palette where I create 3 looks using each of the like six shades, how they're broken up. I love Danessa Myricks. You guys know this. I've been a huge fan of every Lightwork palette that I've owned. I own 3, 4, 5, and now 6. And go watch the video if you want to see how unique and functional the packaging is for this. But I think Danessa Myricks really does make approachable, kind of shifty shades. Again, with Danessa Myricks, I feel like you could easily create just like a neutral base, and then you can pop in 1 or 2 of these special shades. And yes, you're gonna get this like really beautiful, punchy colorfulness on your lids. But if you want to do something like neutral and more approachable, you really can with these eyeshadows. Such a fun, colorful palette. And I will say, I don't always feel like I can create a full look using the Danessa Myricks Lightworks palette, but with this one, and again, you'll see if you have seen my review, I can create, I did dip into like an actual like powder, but I can create full looks using just this palette alone. So I'm a really big fan of this one, and I think it's such a fun, colorful palette. We are now gonna move on to small eyeshadow palettes. I love a small, I'm gonna say like a pocket palette. Sometimes I hate saying pocket palette because I feel like it makes me think of something like really inappropriate in like the toy realm. Do you get where I'm going with that? Like, I feel like I'm almost saying that, even though I'm not at all. Why does my brain think of these things? Probably because I read too many smutty books. But where was I going with this? Oh, I don't have a large category that I'm talking about. I don't have a large eyeshadow palette category I'm talking about today, just because I don't really have a lot of large eyeshadow palettes. I do like large things, if you get what I mean. But when it comes to my eyeshadow palettes, I like to keep them a little bit more curated for the most part, a little bit smaller. That's the only time you'll hear me saying I like a small thing, you know? Okay, top small eyeshadow palettes. We have Natasha Denona I Need a Nude. Been a favorite for many years. First eyeshadow palette that I owned of this one, cracked, broke, shattered because I used it so frequently. purchased another one because I literally love this eyeshadow palette so much. I can turn my brain off and do a look with this palette and I'm gonna love it every time. Second favorite small palette, I feel like is also gonna come as no surprise. My Rowan 1111 quad, another eyeshadow palette that I repurchased because I had to replace it and I couldn't, my makeup collection could not go on without having this in it. Such a fun, beautiful quad of cream shadows, very punchy on the eyes, super beautiful. So highly recommend that, as I have for quite some time. And then this might be a little bit of a curveball. My third favorite small palette is going to be the Kaja Chocolate Dahlia Beauty Bento Stack. I almost said snack. The reason I chose this one, I was also thinking about the newest like neutral one, the cold brew one. But with the cold brew, you're getting two metallics and one matte, whereas with Chocolate Dahlia, you're getting two mattes. And what I really love the Kaja Beauty Bentos for is just like a quick, simple look. Sometimes I like to just use the mattes from a bento and then do like an indie shadow on the lids to kind of like make it a little bit more special. I really love these for that purpose. I believe I've taken at least one, if not two or three Kaja stacks every time I've traveled this year as well, and they're just very functional. I get like they're a little bit bulky, but in terms of travel, I feel like they can kind of bang around a little bit and I haven't had issues with mine breaking. And I just think they're really cute as well. Okay, now we're talking about non-affordable palettes that are $50 and under. Woo, $50 and under. We are really doing things. I will say I am not the biggest fan of drugstore eyeshadows, and honestly, even like ColourPop palettes, I just feel like I like to invest in my eyeshadow. Like, I'm fine spending more money in honestly everything. I feel like I'm a little bit stuck up when it comes to makeup, but I will still try drugstore like foundations, primers, whatever. Anyway, $50 under I get is not affordable. But I think the most affordable of the three that I'm going to be talking about is the Alter Ego Canyon eyeshadow palette, which I believe retails for $20 or possibly even less. I do actually also have a code with Alter Ego. You don't have to use my code. You can use anyone's code. Just use a code because you'll save an additional 10%, making it even less expensive. Alter Ego actually has an incredible formula. I have not had any issues with the matte shadows that I've used from them. They do also do the like cream to matte formula that Natasha Denona does. I will say, even in Natasha Denona palettes, the cream to mattes usually aren't my absolute favorite, but I love this palette. This dupes the Natasha Denona bronze palette, which I actually don't own. I did complete this palette, No Pan Left Behind, earlier this year, and I just loved the looks that I created using this one. For a warm, neutral, everyday palette, I think this is absolutely stunning. And again, I believe this is $20, which honestly, in this day and age, is not that bad. Was it Lauren May Beauty who said $20 is the new, did she say 35 or something like that? I'm like, oh, that is so true, girl. All right, maybe we'll go in order of like cost. But the next one that I have to talk about is the Cosmic Beauty Undergrowth eyeshadow palette. I do also have a review and 4 looks using this palette. If you like green eyeshadow, you should own this palette. I think this is so beautiful. I will say I did struggle with a couple of matte shadows in this eyeshadow palette, specifically the shade Nettle. I'm like, oh, that one gave me a little bit of just like creased a little bit on my outer corner, but the shimmer shades in this palette, again, like the things that are happening in my brain, the drool that would be coming out of my mouth if I was okay with like my makeup wearing away. Oh, it's so beautiful. I will say, I believe this one retails for $39, and I always use Anielica's code. She has a code with Cosmic Beauty. Their shipping, at least to the States, is usually a little bit high. So, I mean, I think even with shipping though, I paid less than $50, so I'll take it, especially because I love green so much. And then the final eyeshadow palette under $50 that I wanted to talk about is the Viseart Soleil Le Plage eyeshadow palette. This one I believe retails for $44, which Viseart is actually like typically considered a more expensive, like high-end luxury brand. So for $44, I actually, for Viseart, I don't think is that bad. I love this palette just for kind of like everyday neutrals, nothing too punchy on the eyes. I know typically I like something super metallic and punchy on the eyes, but if I want to go a little bit more subdued, a little bit more subtle, this is such a beautiful eyeshadow palette. This is another one where the mattes are definitely a little bit more buildable, so that really works well for me, and I have loved this palette since purchasing it, I believe in 2021. I've talked about this palette a lot on my channel. I think it's high quality, beautiful looks. and just one of my favorites in terms of under 50. This is where we definitely could have had like some overlap. Like I definitely love like my Natasha Denona I Need a Nude. Mini I Need a Nude. The one I just talked about in the Eyeshadow palettes. That's under 50. I could have also talked about in this category. But as I said, I wanted to talk about as many palettes as possible. All right, for luxury, high-end, over $50, I have two Pat McGrath palettes. And I want to preface this by saying, I don't think you should ever in your life pay full price for Pat McGrath. She runs enough sales, and truly, like with Pat McGrath, I think you're paying for the name and you're paying for the packaging. The packaging is really nice, luxe and heavy, but you can, if you are looking for like the special shades, buy two indie palettes for the price of a Pat McGrath palette. That being said, I do really love my Bronze Seduction palette. I would not want to trade this for anything. I love the color story, and I will say the green shade in here was one of the first green shades that I really fell in love with. If ever there's like a neutral look with a green or a green look that I just feel like is missing a little something, I'll reach into this almost as like a lid topper shade, and I really like it for that. I also like that we have more like browns rather than our typical rosy tones with Pat McGrath. But for one of my like really high-end palettes, this is definitely a favorite in my collection. But please do not pay full price for a Pat McGrath palette. I'm gonna talk about another Pat McGrath palette. I got this one 40% off, so I was like, okay, like you really can if you wait. Pat McGrath usually runs like an end of year sale between like Christmas and New Year's Eve, and it's usually 30 to 40% off. So if there's anything on your wish list, please wait until that time. I will say I also really did enjoy the Pat McGrath Moonlit Seduction eyeshadow palette. I love the blue brown shade in this palette. It is a flakier blue brown shade, so it is really sparkly on the eyes, but it is flaky, and I feel like it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, so definitely keep that in mind. I will say the matte shadows in here, we are getting more of those like rosy purpley tones, but I do feel like it really does mix well with the selection of special shades we have in this palette. I love I think I like this so much because I've really fallen in love with like blue or like blue-green aqua shades, and this kind of speaks to my soul there. And then we have a really beautiful gold and champagne shade. So another really beautiful luxury palette, but again, we're not paying, don't do it. Do not pay over $100 for a Pat McGrath palette. All right, and then the last over 50 that I wanted to talk about, we have more Ensley Rain coming up, but this is where I could squeeze this palette in. This is the Ensley Rain Flower Moon eyeshadow palette. I think this is my most used Ensley Rain palette in my collection. Part of that is because in order to no pan left behind this palette, I had to reach for it so many times because we have such a variety of shimmer shades. Now these shimmers, Ensley Rain shimmers, need I say more? I don't think so. My one complaint with this palette, not really complaint, but nitpicky thing, is I feel like there's too many similar green shades here. Like we could have done something a little bit different there, but like these three shades right here for warm pinks, oh my gosh, I love these three. I love a blue, as I said, so like for like blurples or like blue purples, I also love. I love the shade Sprout. I love an ethereal kind of like blue silver shade, so Sprout is beautiful. Also Sapling is, I think of all the greens, I love Sapling just because it is kind of like that. On the eyes, it's almost like an aqua. It's so pretty, but there are some, I love greens, so I'm not complaining that there's so many green shimmers, but there's a few green shimmers in this palette that do kind of overlap a little bit. The selection of mattes is not my absolute favorite. I honestly almost wish that we could have just taken the mattes out and done an all shimmer palette. I love the Ensley Rain shimmers, but sometimes I look at the mattes here and I'm like, what do I really want to do? Regardless, I love Ensley Rain. I think this is one of their less expensive palettes. I want to say this is like $69, and again, you can use a code with Ensley Rain. I have a code. You don't have to use my code, but if you're purchasing from Ensley Rain, save yourself 10%, use someone's code. Okay, then I have mainstream and indie, so let's jump into mainstream palettes. I feel like I don't have a lot of favorite mainstream palettes these days. I feel like I'm just so bored with anything mainstream. Not a lot of mainstream palettes interest me anymore, but last year I purchased the ABH Cosmos palette, and I do really like this palette. I created a couple looks with this palette last year that I thought were absolutely beautiful. I like that we have warm browns, but we also have these really deep kind of rich purples, this deep kind of like clay brown shade, and I just absolutely love the shimmers in this palette. Oh, this is a really pretty one, so I like that. I had to find somewhere to fit my Natasha Denona I Need a Nude eyeshadow palette in, and this is where we're putting it in. I will say, and I've said this before, I wish that we had just fully committed to cool toned in this eyeshadow palette, and I wish we could take out this peach shade. I don't love that shade, and I also don't love the shade Vague. I feel like it's almost a little bit too warm to kind of mix with everything else. Like, I really wish we just committed to cool tones. I don't know why this is I Need a Nude. I feel like it would, like, I feel like this is more cool, and when I think of nude, I think of like straight neutrals, and this is just a little bit more cool leaning. I will say I really do love some of the shimmer or lid topper shades in this palette. This is a palette that I, especially towards the beginning of this year, I was reaching into a lot, again, to create more of like a neutral, nude, cool leaning base, and then I would pop on my lid just like one indie shadow, and I really enjoy having this palette for that as well. And then my final mainstream favorite is the Huda Beauty Rose Quartz eyeshadow palette. This is such a beautiful palette. If you are an ethereal lover, this just is such a beautiful kind of romantic palette. A little bit different than your everyday nude or neutral brown eyeshadow palette with the pinks and kind of the dusty purples in here. Huda always does an amazing job kind of mixing in a bunch of different textures and tones, which I always really appreciate. And I just think there's some really unique shades in this eyeshadow palette. I love Moon Magic, and Blissful is probably one of my favorite Huda shades she's ever done. Energized is a really beautiful cool toned taupey shade. The shade Cosmic Love, the marbled shade, is also really pretty. I feel like every time I create a look with this palette, I feel really like girly and really pretty, and I just really enjoy this palette. Okay, top indie palettes. I went with, I tried to go with all these palettes, except for one, is a palette from this year, but I tried to, like, obviously what am I trying to say? Oh my gosh, girl, get your brain straight. Okay. I knew I was going to be sharing my top 3 palettes of 2024. I have tried a lot of indie this year. So for this top indie category, not only are these some of my top indies, but again, I didn't want to like overlap. So I tried to choose palettes that I didn't purchase this year. The one exception to that, I may have purchased at the end of last year, but didn't get to trying until this year. It's the Unearthly Cosmetics Sorcerer's Smoke eyeshadow palette. This is another eyeshadow palette that I could have included in neutral palettes with a twist. I love that we have kind of like a cool toned quad, we have a warm toned quad, and then we have a green quad. Unearthly's shimmer shades are also just some of the top tier, top notch palettes. I would say if you're looking to dabble in indie, Ensley, Bella Beaute Bar, and Unearthly would be probably my top 3 recommendations. And the brands that I'm most comfortable with and own the most from, I don't actually own a lot from Unearthly, but the few palettes that I do have from them, I've been so impressed with. And then obviously I do own quite a bit from Ensley and Bella Beaute Bar. But the metallics in this palette are just so special. And this is a palette I feel comfortable creating looks with that I can also wear to work. So that's why I feel like this one is one of my top indie palettes, because sometimes it's like I feel like I can only reach for my indie palettes on the weekends, because like I don't want to be like having a rainbow on my eyes sitting in the lobby with patients staring at me being like, what is this, clown? Not that colorful makeup makes you a clown, but do you know what I mean? Sometimes it's like, okay, I just don't know that this is appropriate for work. All right, next up from Bella Beaute Bar, I have the Basic Witch eyeshadow palette. This is my first Bella Beaute Bar eyeshadow palette, and I have not looked back since. Actually, the look that I have on today, I created using the Bella Beaute Bar Recently De-Influenced eyeshadow palette, and I have created a look similar to this using this palette. I will say, mattes, really easy to work with, even though there are very colorful shades, but for me, what steals the show with Bella Beaute Bar is their special shades. I absolutely love Perfectly Wicked for like a really beautiful kind of cooler toned pinky purple. So beautiful and metallic on the eyes. The shade Incantation is a really beautiful shifty orange bronzy red shade. I loved that shade this spring summer. I also have Hocus Pocus, which is a really fun green. I do have a palette a day for 30 days sharing spooky looks that will be coming towards the end of this month. But I did kind of like a Beetlejuice inspired look using like purples and greens with this eyeshadow palette, which actually you guys really loved. I can't remember which, I think I was doing a different, like my summer palette a day for 30 days that I had that look on, and I got so many compliments on that, and I honestly loved the way that that look turned out. And I was using the Basic Witch palette. Such a good place to start with Bella Beaute bar, just because I don't know, I feel like maybe the color story as a whole isn't the most approachable, but these shimmers, again, you can pair the shimmers in this palette with different neutral looks, and I just feel like it really makes a neutral look pop while not being too much. And then my final in this category, top 3, is going to be the Tiny Marvels eyeshadow palette. I pulled this out to No Pan Left Behind this palette earlier this year and just reminded myself of how incredible this formula is, this color story I love. I created some really beautiful looks. There was a look I created using these 2 metallic shades. I forget, this is like one of my absolute favorite blue browns in my entire collection. This one is not flaky like the one in the Pat McGrath. This one is definitely more smooth and metallic. It is so beautiful. I'm so glad I pulled this out earlier this year, and this is such a solid one. I believe this is still available on the Sydney Grace website, and I believe the proceeds, at one point they did, I don't know if they still do, I think they go to Mel and her family still. So honestly, this palette sometimes makes me sad to pull out though. All right, and then my top 3 indie palettes. The only one that wasn't in the actual top 3 of my ranking because it was, what was my other top? I can't remember what the third, was it? Anyway, I think this came in number 4, but I had already talked about the 3rd ranked eyeshadow palette and I didn't want to repeat. So we have Ensley Rain Groovy Gardens. Such a beautiful color story, grungy, very fitting for the fall. Again, it's that beautiful Ensley Rain shimmer formula. The shade Jazz is like one of my favorite, again, like green aqua shades. It's so pretty. The Bella Beaute Bar Poison Garden eyeshadow palette, I do have a full dedicated review on, creating 3 looks with this palette. This is so good. I love everything about this palette. I love the color story. I love the grunginess, and I love the different variety of shades that we get. We have some warmer shades with the mustard yellow and the orange. We have purples. We have even like a rosy pink. We have blues. We have greens. And again, with the metallics, and like the shades in this palette are so special. I think Poison Ivy might be one of my favorite shades in my entire collection. It's kind of like a blue brown teal sort of shade. So like, does it get any better than that? I honestly don't think so. And then my final top palette of this year has been my top since trying it. It's the Ensley Rain Cold Moon eyeshadow palette. I have raved about this palette for so long. In my mid-year ranking, this was ranked number 1. In my most recent ranking, this was ranked number 1. Will it be ranked number 1 at the end of the year? I don't know, but it just might be. Again, metallic shades, so special. Again, with the Ensley Rain formula, you can do like 1, 2, 3 shadows, and you're gonna get a really beautiful punchy look on the eyes. So I can't rave about this one enough. It is definitely a top favorite in my entire collection, and definitely a top favorite from this year. After that, you guys, I am definitely out of breath. That is going to wrap up and conclude today's video talking about my top 3 eyeshadow palettes in 9 separate categories. I would love to know about some of your favorite eyeshadow palettes in the comments down below. Let me know what your favorite indie brand is and your favorite indie palette. I want to know, because I am hunting to try still other indie brands that I haven't dabbled in, so definitely let me know in the comments below. Other than that, thank you so much for sticking around to watch today's video and for supporting me and my channel as you guys always do. I love you guys so much, and I will catch you in my next video. Bye.